Good morning. This is John Veenstra, and we're in Just Studio again. I'm glad to bring you this weekly broadcast for the time of our Corona lockdown. Feeling a little nostalgic this morning because I've been filling in for the sabbatical at New Street, and this is the last broadcast that we're doing because next week I'm out of a job. So you've heard this before. I'll say it again. John Veenstra, for those of you who are new to this broadcast, I'm a retired associate minister at the Burlington New Street Christian Reformed Church. And this is the fourth Sunday of Easter and the sixth week of our Corona lockdown. We're doing time together, and just grateful that we have the opportunity to minister to one another in this way. I want to deal with the question, where is God? You hear a lot of moaning and groaning on the internet, and some in the media and some in the papers, and people are saying, wow, where is God in all this? If God is all loving, all wise, and all powerful, how come this happens? And this has been going on so long. When is it going to be over? And how could an all-loving and an all-powerful God let us get caught up in a mess like this? I'm decided that I would include the readings in the sermon this week, and you'll notice that the first Old Testament reading is from Lamentations 3, and I'm projecting it on a background of art depicting the fall of Jerusalem, because Lamentations is written by Jeremiah, and it's his reflection on the destruction of Jerusalem, and he's feeling a little blue. I found it really interesting. Later on, you'll see a picture of Jeremiah painted by Rembrandt, and Rembrandt must have had some sense of this because he put him in a blue coat. But we're reading from Lamentations 3. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. He has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains. Even when I call out or cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has barred my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. And then he goes on, like a bear lying in wait, like a lion in hiding. He dragged me from the path and mangled me and left me without help. He drew his bow and made me the target for his arrows. He pierced my heart with arrows from his quiver. I became the laughingstock of all my people. They mocked me in song all day long. He has filled me with bitter herbs and given me gall to drink. He has broken my teeth with gravel. He has trampled me in the dust. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. And so I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. It is because of the Lord's great love that we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, and if you've never known where that hymn comes from, well, it comes from Lamentations 3. The New Testament reading is from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, and you've heard that at every wedding, time out of mind. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast. But do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I also am known. And so these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And we're used to say, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And I pray, as always, may the meditations of my mouth, the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. There are three things that I want to draw to your attention this morning. And one of them is causing me some chagrin, because I've always thought that Solomon was a bit of an old grump. There was this doggerel, which you don't learn in seminary, but, King Solomon and King David had led merry lives with many lady friends and many wives. But when old age came over them with many qualms, King Solomon wrote the Proverbs and King David wrote the Psalms. And Solomon, well, when he wrote the Proverbs, he just sounds a little defeated. He says, that which has been is that which will be again, and that which has been done is that which will be done again. And so there is nothing new under the sun. But hey, now we have to say he nailed it. He was right. I'm going to introduce you to something I saw from a distance from a cruise ship in Venice. It's called the Lazarette. And the term comes from the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, because Lazarus, Jesus says, was laid at the gate of the rich man's estate. And so Lazarus was separate. He was quarantined, and comes from the Italian lazaretto, and it's a quarantine station. Quarantine comes from the Latin word for 40. And the Venetians, anyone who came in on a ship in the 1600s, spent 40 days on this lazarette until they had either manifested themselves as infected or as healthy. They were dealing with the Black Death. The Black Death swept Europe from 1347 to 1352. 1/3 of the population died. And it came from rat-infested grain ships through Sicily and from Jaffa on the Black Sea. And the picture on the left is the inside of one of the halls. And on the right side, it's still a modern concept, because when the guys walked on the moon, they came back, they were quarantined. It would be a stretch to have anyone bring back a virus from the moon, but technically it was possible, so they quarantined them. And the idea is prevalent. You learn about American immigration, you have to deal with Ellis Island, where people were quarantined if they were processed, but you were quarantined if there was any kind of suspicion that you might harbor an illness. And the Canadians weren't far behind. We had Gros Isle just down the river from Quebec, and it was a quarantine station since the potato famine in Ireland from the 1830s right onto World War II. 5,000 victims are buried under the cenotaph, which you can see in the left of your picture, victims of typhus and cholera. And the biggest problem, if you read about this, at Grosse Ile was asymptomatic carriers, people who presented well when they got off the boat and then went to Montreal and dropped dead in the street 2 weeks later because the disease had caught up with them. And novel ideas of dealing with the virus certainly was the Oberammergau Passion Play, because in 1633, the folks in Oberammergau made a deal with God. They said, we'll perform the story of the Passion every 10 years, as long as you spare us. This year, it will be the second time in history that the play will not proceed. And I know folks who were going to go and whose trips were canceled. And so quarantine and places in which to be quarantined is not exactly new. Solomon was right. I have to admit it. There is nothing new under the sun, unless you're in the legal business or in the insurance business, because the second point is from the legal and the insurance desk: is coronavirus an act of God? They're not worried about God releasing a virus. They're worrying about a contract. When the Chinese government closed their economy 3 months ago, there were all kinds of lawyers all over the world saying to their clients, well, you can't fulfill your contractual obligations because your supply line has been disrupted. And so we'll put a term in your contract that says, for any reason, if by an act of God you can't fulfill your contract, you're off the hook. And so, yep, it is an act of God if you're in the insurance or in the legal business. But for the rest of it, it's a live issue, because we have to deal with the question, how can a loving God allow earthquakes or wildfires or tsunamis or massacres like the one in Nova Scotia 2 weeks ago? Or how come so many seniors, so many of our parents, our grandparents are dying with COVID-19? 3/4 of all the people who have died in Ontario have come from nursing homes. The rest of us turn out to be fairly healthy. But this has wiped the deck with the aged among us. And so you can fill in the blank. There will be other blanks that you can fill in, but it's an issue for folk. And I thought we should try to address it. C.S. Lewis posthumously published a book called God in the Dock. And he deals with issues like this. People want to charge God with being, well, unfair or mean, or, well, just not living up to our expectations. Now, the picture is from To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's, of course, Atticus Finch. God needs no legal defender, but the least we can do is to examine the charges that folks in their grief and their pain so readily or inappropriately and eagerly make against God. You have to begin with Scripture. One of the reasons I have introduced to you new wording for the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation, has been changed to sustain us in this time of trial, is because of James. James says, no one undergoing a trial, that's us, should say, we're being hassled by God. God is not tempted by evil. And he himself does not tempt anyone. Whatever you can say about God, charging him with being mean and miserable is not appropriate, because James goes on to say that instead, rather, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. God is and remains merciful, kind, loving, and faithful. The problem is, and I quote from the passage we read, 1 Corinthians 13, we know in part, We prophesy in part. We see through a glass darkly. Our vision and our understanding is distorted. By what? Well, we can debate about that until the cows come home. But this is how it is. We understand in part and we see in part through a glass darkly. Amos had it in Amos 3. He says, and you really need to read this verse backwards, surely the Lord God does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. The Old Testament prophets had a leg up on us because when they predicted terrible things, they did so because God instructed them. And so their words carried weight. And this is why he begins by saying, if a ram's horn sounds in the city, do the people not tremble? Because they expected that if calamity comes to a city, it was brought by the Lord. And here we go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah fits this perfectly. Here's Jeremiah in his blue coat, doing his song sung blue, because that's Lamentations all over. He says, I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. He has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. Jeremiah is one of these unfortunate fellows who's tapped on the shoulder by God, and God says to him, before you were born, I set you aside to say to the people of Jerusalem that if you don't clean up your act, if you don't straighten out your ways, if you do not return and repent, I'm going to wipe your city clean like a wife wipes a dish over the sink. I'm going to bring the Babylonians and they're going to destroy you and they're going to exile you and they're going to do all kinds of nasty things. This, I assure Jeremiah, you will get out of it with your life. But in Jeremiah's case, not a whole lot else. And so Jeremiah bewails the misfortune of Jerusalem, and yet he ends on a happy note. Because he says, even though God causes grief, he will have compassion, because that's the kind of God he is. A compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. He does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. And this is why I think it's totally inappropriate for us to pray, lead us not into temptation. God says, no, I do not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin new each and every morning. So God says, not guilty to our charge that he's mean, miserable, and ornery, and that he has put us into a tight spot and given us a hard time. I call this Toddler Talk. And I come back to one of my favorite paintings, Vincent van Gogh, First Steps. He copied it after Millet. And he shows what we have seen in our own family, because we have a youngster in our list of grandchildren who is 2.5 and who is a toddler, who just has learned to walk, but hasn't quite learned, what it's like. They learn how to walk, but they don't look for traffic. They pick something up and stick it in a light socket. They climb to the top of the high chair, and then because they've seen something do it on a cartoon, they want to jump off and fly away. Why can't I fly away like the kids do in the cartoons that I see on TV? They act like toddlers, they talk like toddlers, and they need constantly to be rescued. When we charge with God with this kind of miserable evil, we're talking and acting like toddlers, like little kids. I'll give you a few examples. In 1954, the year we arrived in this wonderful country, Hurricane Hazel in November washed away an entire street in Toronto. The developer had put it on the Humber River floodplain. It was called Raymore Drive. And the flood wiped away 14 houses, 36 people died. And the result was that the province invented, and I'm saying that respectfully, conservation authorities. And rule number one for any kind of conservation authority is thou shalt not build on a floodplain. You can garden on a floodplain. You can picnic on a floodplain. You can play baseball on a floodplain. But don't put up a house, because every 100 years, and with climate change, the 100 years have shrunk to every 5 or 10 years, some massive flood comes along and cleans house. And that's exactly what happened in our own backyard in Toronto. Can you blame God? No. But you can certainly thank the province for getting with the program and bringing in this kind of a rule. You look at the west coast of North America. I am no great earthquake specialist, but there is this wonderful thing called the Cascadia subduction zone, which is where two faults come together, and a whole string of beautiful cities from Vancouver in the north to San Francisco in the south is built right on top of this subduction zone. And when the plates shift, we have trouble. In 1989, a San Francisco Bay Area earthquake measuring 7.1 on the Richter scale in magnitude killed 67 and injured over 3,000. Over 100,000 buildings were damaged and destroyed. Well, can we blame God? Well, God would say, well, wait a minute. I didn't make you build on an earthquake vault on the subduction zone. You did it all by yourself. It's a great place to live. Vancouver is your prime example. I'm going to give you a quote, not from a prophet of doom or some TV evangelist, but from an underwriter. The Canadian underwriters in 2001 published an article which said that Victoria and Vancouver, plus the industrialized lowlands of southwestern BC, face a high and unavoidable risk of a major earthquake, a risk that will likely be dwarfed by a greater hazard, and that is of follow-up fires. So Vancouver is going to face trouble somewhere along the line with an earthquake. Can we then blame God? God will say, told you, should have been a little more careful, paid attention to Hurricane Hazel and all that other kind of good stuff. In January or in the spring of 2010, we went on a cruise. We don't do them that often, but we went on the Caribbean cruise, and there had just been an earthquake in the Caribbean and World Renew, and I was serving in Owen Sound at the time, and we raised in one offering $35,000 for relief in Haiti, because Haiti was devastated. And we were just amazed when we toured the rest of the Caribbean that the rest of the Caribbean was not devastated. Why was Haiti devastated and the rest of the Caribbean had a few cracks in the sidewalks and a few cracks in houses, but that was it? And the answer is poor construction and no building codes. Been like that for years. And every time an earthquake comes along, because that too is an earthquake area, destruction follows. Can you blame God? Well, I don't think it's nice, nor is it appropriate, nor is it fair. Hurricanes come sweeping off the South Atlantic. You see them here, 3 of them in a row, one over Texas and one approaching Cuba and one over the Curacao neighborhood. And they're all going to dump huge amounts of water on the states and damage all kinds of things and lead to wildfires. This is a picture of the wildfires in BC in 2018. And before that, it was Fort McMurray. And last year, it was Australia. And can we blame God for wildfires caused by climate change? God will say, I plead not guilty. You've done it to yourself by not taking good care of the creation I gave you. Then we come to Ebola. 11,000 people in the greatest outbreak, 500 healthcare staff. Now, I am going to bite my lip and not say what could be said, but somewhere behind Ebola and somewhere behind this current virus are people who messed with things that they shouldn't have messed with and released viruses into the human life that we share. And now we have over 1 million infections worldwide. Can we blame God? God will again say, not guilty. I keep things separate, and I think you should keep things separate too. Same thing. The tsunami in 2004 killed 250,000 people. Now again, an earthquake area. Again, tsunamis happen in earthquake areas every 100 years or more frequently. They happened before, they'll happen again. But when you build too close to the water, fishermen should be on the beach, not tourist houses. They should be in the hills, but it's so inconvenient to walk a long way to the beach. And it's so much easier to make money if you build right on the beach. And then the tsunami comes along and destroys everything and kills a whole bunch of people. And again, the question is, can we blame God? And the answer is, well, you can if you want to, but it's toddler talk. It doesn't make sense. Picture from the States, a gentleman playing at a Veterans Memorial Home in New Jersey. All kinds of people dying of the coronavirus. The New York Times says the virus has been cruelest at nursing homes. Boy, do we know that in Ontario, where a combination of an aging or frail population, chronic understaffing, shortages of protective gear, constant physical contact between workers and residents has hastened its spread. Can we blame God? No. Can we blame God for 4 people to a room, 2 people sick, 2 well? Can you blame God for staff having to work multiple sites because part-timers are cheaper? You cannot blame God for garbage bags being used as gowns because there's no personal protective equipment on hand or in storage. And you cannot blame God for inspections that might have alerted us to this being canceled as a cost-saving measure. All these things have happened, and it's easier to blame God, and it's easier to say, how come you let this happen? Well, God says, you did it, not me. People ignoring common sense and not practicing keeping their distance cannot blame God when they come down with COVID-19. Toddler talk is found in Genesis because God said, don't, and they did. And then when God said, what did you do? What happened? I mean, moms and dads have this kind of conversation with toddlers all the time. And so the man says, it was her. You put her here. It's your fault. She gave me something from the tree and I ate it. And I call it toddler talk. It runs in our DNA. We inherit it. We practice it. We get good at it and we pass it on. The snake convinced me and I ate. And Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. If we're going to deal with this crisis sensibly and wisely, and as Christians, we need to give up toddler talk, we need to give up childish ways, and we need to revise our understanding and our insight and our way of dealing with things. And we need to deal with the issues that God does put before us, because there's 3 of them. There's more, but hey, we're running out of time. Three things God is calling our attention to through this crisis. Number one, climate change. Again, this is from CNN. This is not fake news. Okay, this is Mumbai before the lockdown and Mumbai after the lockdown. Mumbai without and with nitrous oxide from exhaust pipes. Your eyes will tell you the story that something needs to be done about our reliance on fossil fuels. It used to be coal, and now it's coal and fossil fuel. God has given us this wonderful world to look after, and we have to be more careful with it. Time magazine said the sharp decline in pollution and carbon emissions is a positive development for the planet and the humans who live on it, because air pollution contributes to millions of deaths across the globe every year, aggravating cardiovascular disease and respiratory health. Years of exposure to pollution have made us today more susceptible to corona disease. The damage is already done, said Sasha Martian. And so we have fouled our own nest. We have mucked up our own environment. And the seniors among us are the first, the canary in the coal mine, the first among us to pay the price for our mistreatment of God's universe. And so we need to rethink our way of treating the world and our way of looking after the elders among us. I predict that in the next election, what to do about nursing homes is going to be number one on the agenda of the nation. And as a church person, as someone who's been in ministry for 50 years, we're getting along quite nicely on Zoom and on the phone. And by this kind of media, what we need is face-to-face. But do we need to put up a $3 million church building so we can meet there a couple of times a week? And so I think in this crisis, things come clearly into focus, and the church needs to ask, are the billions we put into church structures that sit there doing nothing most of the time a good investment? Are they justified when there are so many other real and vital needs in the world? You shudder when you think of all the refugee camps going through the corona crisis without the health facilities and the health care that we have, and your heart aches. God is calling us to pay attention to Lazarus, to attention to the one quarantined outside our gate, and to be merciful and to administer charity and love as he did. So to end on a good note, trust God and wash your hands, and hear Jesus say to you, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust God, trust also in me. He said this just before going to the cross. And like Jeremiah, he knew whereof he spoke. Jeremiah had been through his trial. Jesus was about to go through his. And he said, don't fret it. Trust God, trust me. Put your hand in the hand of the man. Worrying doesn't take away tomorrow's troubles, but it does take away today's peace. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Sustain us in these times of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. For those of you who belong to New Street, just a reminder from the deacons that the offering today is for the ministry of the Gems. It was supposed to have been Gems Sunday today, but well, that too got canceled. And in closing, because this is a transitional service in this series, we want to thank the following folk at New Street for helping make these past 7 weeks possible. Technical help came from Daryl DeHaan, Mike Flockstra, Mike Showman, Irving Boss, and the studio from Jeff Weinstein. We want to thank Heather and Jamie, who have put all the orders of worship together and delivered them to people not on the internet. And we want to thank Grace for picking the hymns, and Jordan and his dog, because we got to meet Jordan's dog on Zoom as part of the Sunday morning prayer service that we have online. And we'd like to thank all our elders and our deacons for giving us the time to do this and to produce this. Thanks and blessings and Godspeed to all of you. Next week, we welcome back Pastor Joel. We found this picture of him at the last church in the park. Can't promise he's going to be this sportive and festive next week, but hey, tune in and you can tell for yourself. And so again, we close with Jeremiah, Lamentations. No one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love, for he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God, and Godspeed to all of you, and hopefully we will meet again.